When the HOA showed up with cops demanding I follow their rules, I simply smiled and handed over one piece of paper. Within 5 minutes, the officers were apologizing to me. That's when everything unraveled. 4 more true property battles, shocking HOA standoffs, and wild justice twists. Make sure to subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happened next. I had just finished paving the private road running along my newly purchased 22-acre tract when a clipboard-wielding woman knocked at my gate. Her red blazer screamed HOA, and her tone matched. She didn't introduce herself, just began listing violations. Cracked sidewalk, non-compliant fencing, no approved paint samples for the gate. I listened politely, then interrupted, "I'm not in your HOA." She blinked, then smirked. "Everyone in this development is," she insisted. That was false, and I knew it. See, 2 months ago I bought this land, outside their plotted community, but with a twist. Their entire access road ran through my property. A technicality, sure, but a powerful one. I'd already sent notice to the HOA president. Apparently, she didn't forward the memo. 2 days later, 3 HOA board members showed up in their golf carts, circling my property like vultures. One took photos. Another yelled something about community standards. I stayed inside. My cameras caught it all. That evening, I received a violation notice on my front porch. Unsigned, printed, and completely baseless. The kicker? It came with a fine of $350 for unauthorized perimeter fencing. I laughed. Then I printed the letter for my lawyer, again, highlighting that my land was exempt. I mailed copies to the HOA and county zoning office, this time certified. I also parked my pickup across the shared road for a few hours, just to make a point. The next morning, a deputy rang my bell. "Sir, we got a call about a blocked public road." I smiled, stepped outside, and handed him the parcel map. "Private easement. Here's the deed. This is my road." The deputy nodded, took photos, radioed his supervisor, and left, without another word. The HOA was trying to flex power it didn't have. I expected the stunt to stop there. It didn't. Instead, they escalated. 3 days later, my wife and I returned from town to find orange violation tags on our gate, again unsigned. Worse, someone had stepped into our front yard to place a laminated HOA rules apply sign on our fence. That's when my wife, who happens to be a federal property enforcement agent, snapped a photo and called in a quick favor. Within 24 hours, the HOA got an official cease and desist letter from the U.S. Marshal Service. But they didn't seem fazed. The president responded with a letter claiming municipal override due to some old plat map. I decided to stop playing defense. I pulled the original plat record and deed titles from the county recorder's office. Not only was my property separate, but the HOA's storm drainage and entry gate were technically built 6 feet into my lot. I had legal grounds to charge rent, or remove them entirely. My attorney prepared the notice of encroachment. I gave the HOA president 30 days to respond. Instead, she sent another violation notice. This one claimed my parked tractor was visually disruptive. 2 days later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up again. This time, with 2 officers. One politely asked if I'd comply with HOA orders. I handed over the title packet. "Gentlemen, I own the road, the access point, and the land their gate sits on. They don't own an inch of mine." The younger officer flipped through the documents, his brow rising. The older one looked toward the HOA clubhouse down the hill and just said, "Got it. You're good." They left without another word. That night, I installed security lights and moved my old shipping container, full of tools, right near the easement. The next morning, the HOA lost their minds. The moment I stepped out of my garage the next morning, I noticed something odd. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked at the end of my driveway, both with private security decals slapped on the side. A man and a woman in black polo shirts stood outside, arms crossed, radios clipped to their belts. They didn't look like police, but they were trying hard to look official. I approached cautiously, coffee in hand. Before I could say anything, the man flashed a badge, plastic, gold-painted, and definitely not issued by any government agency. "This is HOA property," he announced. "We're here for compliance." I blinked. Compliance with what? I asked calmly. The woman stepped forward with a clipboard full of printed documents, none of them notarized or even on letterhead. You failed to trim your hedge to regulation height, she said. I looked at my perfectly trimmed hedge, then back at them. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intimidation. I'm not part of your HOA, I said flatly. You people have no jurisdiction here. The man chuckled like he'd heard it all before. That's what everyone says, until we make a call. And just like that, he radioed for backup. 15 minutes later, a local sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The uniformed deputy stepped out and immediately frowned at the private security team. Who called this in? He asked. The fake cop duo pointed at me like I was the problem. He's refusing to comply with the HOA, the woman said. I raised my hand, calm but firm. Officer, I've lived here for 12 years. My property predates their HOA by 5 years. I've never signed a single HOA agreement. The deputy narrowed his eyes, then pulled out his tablet to start checking property lines. While he investigated, the fake cops began whispering between themselves, clearly nervous. I could hear snippets, wrong guy, didn't know, we're screwed. The deputy returned a few minutes later with a raised eyebrow. Sir, he said to me, you're absolutely right. Your house is not, and has never been, under the HOA's legal authority. He turned to the two imposters and asked for their credentials. When they hesitated, he raised his voice. Now. They handed over the fake badges. One glance, and he was on the radio requesting real backup for them. It turns out the HOA had hired a third-party enforcement service that went far beyond its legal limits. These people weren't licensed security officers, nor were they legally permitted to issue citations or enter private property. The deputy cuffed both of them right there. Impersonating a law enforcement official is a felony, he muttered as they protested. I watched in silence, arms crossed, feeling the icy breeze of justice finally blowing. The HOA had crossed a line, and now they just handed me all the ammunition I needed. It was time to hit back. Later that afternoon, I walked into the county clerk's office with a manila envelope in hand. Inside were documents proving my ownership of the entire street my house sat on, deeded to my grandfather during the town's original expansion. The road was never transferred to the municipality. It was private. I owned it. Every inch. I submitted a petition to reassert property rights and restrict all unauthorized use, including HOA activity. By evening, I had the signs printed. Private road, no trespassing, access by permission only. I installed them at both ends of the street with motion sensor cameras aimed right at the curb. Within hours, angry HOA board members showed up, demanding I take them down. I didn't even open the door. I let my lawyer do the talking. You don't own this road, he told them through the speaker system. You have no easement rights. No right of way. No jurisdiction. One board member began shouting about community aesthetics, about bylaws and uniform standards. My lawyer simply smiled and replied, "This isn't your community." Not anymore. The next morning, an emergency HOA meeting was held. They passed a resolution to sue me for obstruction. Their arrogance knew no bounds. But what they didn't realize was that I had already filed an injunction. When they tried to enter court documents, the judge tossed them out, on the grounds that the HOA had no standing over properties not contractually bound to them. The board was humiliated. My lawyer gave a brief statement to the press, and within hours, local blogs were buzzing about the HOA who picked the wrong fight. I spent the weekend peacefully planting lavender by my newly installed wrought iron gate. No cars passed. No barking HOA agents. Just silence. Then came the letter, slipped under my gate in a cheap envelope. It was from Karen, the board president, handwritten in angry cursive. "You may think you've won," it read. "But communities have rules, and eventually, you'll be held accountable." I almost laughed. "Rules only apply," I whispered, "if you have the power to enforce them." Karen's power had just hit a dead end, literally and legally. But I wasn't done yet. They wanted to pretend this road belonged to them? I filed an application to rename it, after my grandfather. Marshall Way. Approved within 2 weeks. A new sign was installed. And I made sure to deliver one directly to the HOA office myself, gift wrapped with a bow. A reminder. The street they tried to claim now bore the name of the man who had secured it a generation earlier. This wasn't just a win. It was a declaration. 2 days after the street signs went up, a white SUV crept down the newly christened Marshall Way. I watched from my porch as it slowed in front of my driveway. The tinted window rolled down, and there she was, Karen. Clenched jaw, sunglasses hiding her fury, hair pinned up like she was expecting a formal meeting. She didn't get out. She just stared at my gate, at the cameras, at the sign that now made her authority a joke. Then, without a word, she drove off. But I knew that look. That wasn't defeat. That was someone plotting. Sure enough, the next morning, I received a citation, hand-delivered by the city. Not from the HOA, but from the local zoning board. It alleged that my new gate and signage violated visibility clearance codes. I had reviewed those codes before installing anything, and I knew the citations were bogus. Still, I showed up to the hearing. The city officer looked uncomfortable the moment he saw my evidence. Permits, measurements, and photographs proving full compliance. "I'm sorry," he said. "We were responding to multiple anonymous complaints." I didn't have to guess who made them. I smiled calmly. "Can I see the complaint record?" I asked. It took some persistence, but the clerk eventually handed over a copy. 3 complaints, all submitted within 5 minutes of each other, all from different email addresses, but all linked to the same HOA office IP. Sloppy. I took the packet and handed it over to my attorney. That was attempt number 3 from Karen and her crew to push their boundaries. And like the last 2, it was about to backfire in a very public way. I requested a formal cease and desist order against the HOA for harassment, submitting not only the complaint logs but also the footage of the private security impersonators and the illegally posted HOA notices from earlier that month. My attorney also filed a civil claim for trespassing and defamation. Karen had poked the bear one too many times. This wasn't just neighborhood squabbling anymore, it was shaping into a courtroom brawl. But that didn't stop her from trying again. Her next move came faster than I expected. That weekend, contractors showed up at the far end of the street, on land I owned, digging into the curb. When I approached and asked for permits, they shrugged. "We're just following work orders," one said. I called the city. They hadn't issued anything. Turned out, the HOA had hired the contractors directly to build a traffic calming island, without legal right to do so. When the police showed up and I showed the land deed, the workers packed up instantly. One officer even muttered, "These HOA folks are out of control lately." With each move, the HOA's desperation grew more obvious. They weren't just angry that I was outside their control. They were terrified others might realize they didn't hold as much power as they claimed. I started hearing from other homeowners, quiet knocks on my door, late-night messages, asking if they too could fight back. That's when I realized I wasn't just defending my house. I was challenging a whole fake empire. Karen had overreached, and now people were starting to see the cracks in her little fiefdom. I held a small gathering at my place the following Saturday. 10 neighbors showed up, some I barely knew. Over lemonade and pulled pork sandwiches, they shared horror stories of HOA fines for parking too close to their own garages, warnings for non-compliant garden gnomes, and secret surveillance by board members driving by and taking photos. One woman was fined $200 for a faded flower pot. These weren't rules. They were weapons. And I had just proven the board wasn't untouchable. By the time the sun set that evening, 2 of those neighbors had already called their lawyers. Another had pulled out her original property deed, realizing she too might be outside the HOA's legal reach. It was like the curtain had been pulled back. And Karen, she must have felt the ground shift, because the next morning, she did something no one expected. She showed up at my front door. I didn't answer immediately. I let her stand there for a minute, face flushed, fists clenched. Then I opened the door just enough to be polite. "You've made your point," she said through gritted teeth. "But if you think you've won anything, think again. You don't belong in this community." I just smiled. "Karen," I said calmly, "the road you drove in on has my name on it now. I belong here more than you ever will." Her face went red. She turned and stormed off without another word. The war wasn't over. But the balance had shifted. I had exposed the HOA's hollow authority for what it was, an illusion propped up by fear and silence. And I wasn't staying quiet anymore. 2 weeks later, Karen was back on the HOA newsletter, this time with a much softer tone. "Community cooperation is essential in these uncertain times," she wrote. "We should strive for neighborly unity." No mention of me, no mention of lawsuits, and definitely no mention of her failed complaints. But everyone knew who she was talking about. Her power had been cracked open in public, and the silence from her usual backers told me one thing: they weren't following her anymore. But I wasn't done. With legal pressure mounting against the HOA and neighbors waking up, I submitted a petition to the county to request an audit of the HOA's past 5 years of financials. I had enough signatures to trigger a review. Karen tried to shut it down, calling it a targeted witch hunt. I responded by emailing the county proof of how HOA dues were spent on personal landscaping around her own home and an unused security kiosk at the end of the road that only ever blocked my driveway. The audit went through, and what they found: over $34,000 in discretionary funds used without board-wide votes. Worse, there were no records for the private security firm that had tried to threaten me weeks earlier. That firm, it turned out, didn't legally exist. Karen had created a fake name and paid her cousin under the table. The county flagged her for fraud. By now, Karen wasn't just sweating, she was drowning. And the rest of the board members? They started jumping ship. In a final desperate act, Karen filed for a temporary restraining order against me, claimed I was harassing the board. But my countersuit hit harder. My legal team presented a full timeline of every incident, backed with surveillance footage, call records, city filings, and my original title documents. It wasn't just a defense, it was a takedown. In court, Karen tried to put on her suburban charm, but the judge wasn't buying it. He dismissed her case in 10 minutes. Then, as if fate was enjoying the drama, he handed her a summons. Civil court. She was now the defendant in 3 separate claims, including property harassment and HOA abuse of authority. Word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some residents who had once sat quietly on the sidelines now stepped up. HOA signs were removed from homes. Several residents filed to dissolve the HOA entirely. The block that once belonged to Karen's clipboard tyranny was now facing a future without her. And me? I just kept trimming my own hedges, watching as her kingdom burned itself down. One rusted container wall at a time. About a month after the court hearing, I got a knock on my door. It was the elderly couple from 2 houses over, the Goldmans. They'd lived there 40 years. "Just wanted to thank you," Mr. Goldman said. "We thought we'd have to move. Karen was fining us for everything. Said our white door wasn't white enough." I smiled, handed him a fresh lemonade, and told him the street was ours now. Legally. Literally. It ended where it started, on the pavement. The city finally issued new street signs, this time with full legal backing. The old HOA map was officially amended. Karen no longer had claim to any of the land my home sat on. She'd been stripped of her power. No gavel, no clipboard, no smug smirk driving by in her white SUV. The fence I put up at the start? Still there. Still rusty. Still legal. And now, a symbol. A symbol of one truth: don't come for someone's land when you never owned the ground beneath your feet.